The distant rumble of thunder masked the sound of Willow Keene's labored breathing as she stumbled across the open prairie, one hand pressed firmly against her bleeding side. The Montana Territory of 1878 was unforgiving to a woman alone, especially one running for her life as darkness fell and storm clouds gathered ominously overhead. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets as Willow spotted the silhouette of a barn rising from the landscape like salvation itself. Her body trembled with exhaustion and blood loss, each step becoming more difficult than the last. The wound in her side courtesy of her late husband's business partner who'd come looking for money that didn't exist throbbed with every heartbeat. Willow pushed open the barn door with the last of her strength, the hinges protesting loudly against the intrusion. The warm smell of hay and horses enveloped her as she collapsed onto her knees, leaving a trail of rainwater and blood on the dirt floor. "Who's there?" A deep voice called out, followed by the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Willow tried to respond, but her voice failed her. She managed only to look up as a tall figure approached, lantern held high, illuminating a face framed by dark brown hair and wary blue eyes. The man's expression shifted from suspicion to concern as the light revealed her condition. "Good Lord," he breathed, setting down both the lantern and rifle before crouching beside her. "You're hurt bad, madam, please," Willow whispered, her vision beginning to blur. They might still be following. The stranger's face hardened as he took in her words and the wound at her side. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man his size. "Stay," he said simply, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "This house owes you shelter." It was the last thing Willow heard before darkness claimed her. Owen Lawson had been tending to a sick mare when the stranger arrived. 10 years of solitude after returning from the war hadn't prepared him for the sight of a beautiful woman bleeding out on his barn floor. As he carried her through the rain toward the main house, he wondered what kind of trouble had found its way to his remote ranch outside Wallace, Montana. Inside his modest home, Owen cleared his kitchen table with one sweep of his arm before laying the unconscious woman down. He worked quickly, lighting more lamps and gathering clean cloths, water, and the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. "This is going to hurt, madam," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "I'm sorry about that." He cut away the blood-soaked fabric of her dress with careful precision, revealing a nasty gash along her ribs. It was deep but clean, likely from a knife rather than a bullet. Owen cleaned the wound with whiskey and water before threading a needle with steady hands. He'd stitched up enough wounds during the war to know what he was doing throughout his ministrations. Owen studied her face. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with freckles scattered across pale skin and auburn hair that had escaped from what once must have been a tidy bun. There was a gold band on her finger, worn thin with time. After bandaging her wound, Owen carried her to his bedroom and tucked her beneath clean sheets. He placed a glass of water on the nightstand, stoked the fire in the small hearth, and settled into the rocking chair across the room with his rifle across his lap. Whoever had done this might still be looking for her, and Owen Lawson wasn't about to let harm come to someone who'd sought refuge under his roof. Willow awakened to unfamiliar surroundings, momentarily disoriented by the rough-hewn wooden ceiling above her. Pain rushed in next, a sharp reminder of recent events. She turned her head slowly to find a man asleep in a chair nearby, his chin resting on his chest and a rifle balanced on his knees. The memories returned in fragments: her husband Thomas's death 6 months prior, the mounting debts he'd hidden from her, and finally, Silas Morgan's visit to their small home in Helena. The banker had made indecent proposals, suggesting ways she could work off Thomas's debt. When she'd refused, his hands had turned violent, his knife flashing in the lamplight. She'd managed to strike him with a cast iron skillet and flee, but not before his blade had found her flesh. A floorboard creaked as she shifted, and the man in the chair woke instantly, blue eyes alert. "You're awake," he said, setting aside the rifle. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," Willow answered cautiously. "Did you?" "Stitched you up," he nodded, moving to pour water from a pitcher. "Knife wound looked like clean cut though deep." He offered her the glass. "Owen Lawson." "This is my ranch, Willow Keene," she replied after taking a careful sip. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Lawson. I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need for thanks," Owen interrupted, uncomfortable with gratitude, "or for Mr. Lawson, just Owen will do." Willow studied him properly for the first time. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors. His hands were calloused, but had been surprisingly gentle when tending to her wound. There was a scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline and a certain wariness in his eyes that spoke of past hardships. "How long have I been unconscious?" she asked. "Just the night. It's morning now." Owen moved to the window, drawing back the curtain to reveal bright sunlight. "You should rest more. I'll bring you something to eat when you're ready." "I can't impose on you," Willow protested weakly. "Once I've gathered my strength, I'll be on my way." Owen turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Keene, Mrs." she corrected automatically, then felt a pang of grief as she added, "Widow, actually." Owen nodded in acknowledgement. "Mrs. Keene, you've lost a fair amount of blood. That wound needs time to heal properly." And he hesitated. "Whoever did that might still be looking for you. This ranch is remote, about 15 miles outside Wallace. You'll be safer here until you're recovered." Willow wanted to argue but found she lacked the strength. The thought of Silas Morgan finding her sent a shudder through her body. "I can pay you," she offered, though the few dollars sewn into her petticoat wouldn't amount to much. A frown crossed Owen's features. "I didn't help you expecting payment. Then why did you help me?" The question slipped out before Willow could stop it. Owen was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window and the vast landscape beyond. "Because everyone deserves shelter when they need it most." His voice was so soft she almost didn't hear him add, "And I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn." The next few days established a cautious routine between them. Owen brought Willow meals and checked her wound, which was healing cleanly thanks to his careful attention. He helped her to the washroom when needed, always respectfully averting his eyes and giving her as much privacy as possible in the confined space of his modest home. Willow learned that Owen had lived alone on the ranch for a decade, running a respectable operation with about 50 head of cattle and a small horse breeding program. His only regular company was his ranch hand Miguel, who lived in a small cabin near the corral and came by each morning for instructions. "You don't get lonely out here?" Willow asked on the fourth day, when she was finally strong enough to sit in a chair by the window. Owen shrugged as he prepared a stew for their dinner. "Got used to it, I suppose. After the war, crowds made me jumpy, found peace in the quiet." "You fought in the war." Willow watched his hands as they deftly chopped vegetables. "Union Army, enlisted when I was 18, fought until Appomattox." The knife paused momentarily. "Saw things no man should see. Did things I'm not proud of," Willow nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My father never came back from the war. Mother said he was there when he returned, but not really. Like his spirit stayed behind on the battlefield." Owen glanced at her, recognition flashing in his eyes. It was the first time they'd shared anything beyond polite conversation, and something shifted between them in that moment of mutual understanding. "Your husband," Owen ventured carefully, "was he also a soldier?" Willow looked down at her hands, at the wedding band she still wore. "No, Thomas was a shopkeeper. We met in Helena after the war when I was working as a seamstress." A sad smile touched her lips. He had grand dreams, always chasing the next opportunity. "I didn't realize until after he died from pneumonia that those opportunities had left us deeply in debt." Owen added the vegetables to the pot. "And I'm guessing whoever gave you that wound had something to do with those debts." Willow's hand instinctively went to her side. "Silas Morgan. He was Thomas's business partner and holds the notes on all our debts. After the funeral, he began visiting regularly, offering to help me manage my financial situation. Her voice hardened. His last visit made it clear what kind of help he had in mind. When I refused, he said he'd take what he was owed one way or another. Owen's jaw tightened visibly, and then he attacked you. Yes, Willow confirmed quietly. I managed to hit him with a skillet and run, but not before. She gestured to her wound. That man won't set foot on this property, Owen stated firmly, his blue eyes intense. You have my word on that. Thank you, Willow said, touched by his protectiveness. But I can't hide forever. Eventually, I'll need to figure out what to do next. One day at a time, Owen advised, stirring the stew. First, you need to heal. That evening, they ate together at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing more easily than before. Owen told her about his prize stallion, Thunder, and his plans to expand his breeding program. Willow shared stories of growing up in Illinois before moving west after her mother died. As Owen cleared their dishes, Willow noticed a battered volume of Wordsworth poems on a nearby shelf. You enjoy poetry? She asked, surprised. A flush crept up Owen's neck. My mother was a schoolteacher. She believed in education, even for a boy more interested in horses than books. Would you mind if I borrowed it? I haven't read anything in weeks. Owen retrieved the book and placed it in her hands with a gentleness that belied his size. It was my mother's favorite. She'd be pleased someone was reading it again. That night, as Willow lay in Owen's bed, he continued to insist on taking the chair or sleeping in the barn. She read poems by lamplight, occasionally glancing at the sleeping form of her unlikely protector. There was something comforting about his presence, solid and steadfast like the mountains visible from his bedroom window. For the first time since Thomas's death, Willow felt something other than fear or grief. It was too soon to name this feeling, but as she drifted off to sleep with Wordsworth's verses in her mind, she acknowledged that whatever it was, it felt dangerously close to hope. By the end of her first week at the Lawson Ranch, Willow had regained enough strength to move around the house. Owen had reluctantly returned to his regular duties, though he checked on her frequently throughout the day. Willow occupied herself by reading Owen's small collection of books, and when she felt strong enough, helping with simple household tasks. On the 8th day, Owen returned from checking the northern pasture to find Willow in the kitchen, her hair tied back with a piece of string, kneading dough on the worn wooden counter. You shouldn't be exerting yourself, he admonished, though the smell of fresh bread made his stomach rumble appreciatively. I'm feeling much better, Willow assured him, and I was going mad with boredom. Besides, she added with a small smile, I've eaten your cooking for a week. Consider this my contribution to our survival. Owen chuckled, a rare sound that Willow had come to treasure. That bad, is it? Let's just say your talents lie elsewhere, Mr. Lawson. The easy banter between them had developed naturally over the days, a comfortable familiarity growing as they shared meals and quiet evenings by the fire. Willow found herself looking forward to Owen's return each day, listening for his footsteps on the porch, enjoying the way his serious face would soften when he saw her. It was dangerous, these feelings. She was still in mourning, still wearing another man's ring, still hunted by Silas Morgan. And yet, she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest whenever Owen entered a room. I thought we might have company for dinner tomorrow, Owen announced as he washed up at the basin. Sheriff Wilson rides out this way once a month or so to check on the outlying ranches. Figured he might have news about your situation. Willow's hands stilled in the dough. You think that's wise? If word gets back to Silas that I'm here. Owen dried his hands and turned to face her. Robert Wilson is a good man, fought alongside me in the war. If anyone can help sort this mess legally, it's him. He hesitated. Unless you'd rather not involve the law, it's not that, Willow sighed. It's just, Silas has connections in Helena. He's a banker respected in the community. My word against his won't count for much. Owen crossed the kitchen to stand before her, close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent of him. You're not alone in this anymore, Willow. The sound of her name on his lips sent warmth spreading through her chest. It was the first time he'd used it instead of Mrs. Keene. "Thank you," she whispered, fighting the urge to lean into him to see if he was as solid and warm as he appeared. Owen cleared his throat and stepped back, seemingly aware of the charged moment between them. "I should check on that mare that foaled last week. Enjoy your baking." After he left, Willow pressed her flour-covered hands to her heated cheeks. She was being foolish, reading too much into simple kindness. Owen Lawson was a good man who'd offered shelter to someone in need, nothing more. Whatever she was feeling was merely gratitude combined with the vulnerability of her situation. Yet that night, when Owen read aloud from a dog-eared copy of Ivanhoe as they sat by the fire, Willow found herself watching his hands, his profile, the way firelight caught in his hair, and knew she was lying to herself. Sheriff Robert Wilson arrived the following afternoon, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile when Owen greeted him on the porch. The two men embraced briefly before Owen led him inside. "Robert, this is Mrs. Willow Keene," Owen introduced her. "Mrs. Keene, Sheriff Robert Wilson." The sheriff removed his hat, revealing salt and pepper hair. "Madam, pleasure to meet you, though I understand the circumstances aren't the best." "Thank you for coming, Sheriff," Willow replied, offering him coffee. Once they were settled at the kitchen table, Owen explained the situation: Willow's husband's debts, Silas Morgan's attack, and her subsequent flight. "Morgan," Wilson mused, stroking his mustache. "Helena First National Bank, balding fella with a fancy vest. That's him," Willow confirmed. "Interesting," the sheriff said. "Got a telegram about him 3 days ago. Seems he was found dead in an alley behind the Silver Dollar Saloon in Helena. Knife wound to the gut." Willow gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Owen's expression darkened as he leaned forward. "What happened?" "Not entirely clear," Wilson replied. "But word is he'd been drinking heavily, boasting about tracking down some woman who'd crossed him. Witnesses say he got into an argument with a gambler, things got heated and the gambler pulled a knife." "So it wasn't connected to Mrs. Keene?" Owen pressed. "Doesn't appear so. Gamblers in custody confessed to the whole thing." Wilson glanced at Willow. "But it does solve one of your problems, madam. No one's hunting you now." Relief flooded through Willow, followed quickly by guilt for feeling relieved at a man's death. "What about the debts?" she asked. "They don't die with him." "That I can't say for certain," Wilson admitted. "But if you'd like, I can make inquiries when I'm next in Helena, find out who inherited Morgan's assets and liabilities." "I'd appreciate that," Willow said softly. The conversation moved on to other matters: cattle rustlers operating near the Wyoming border, news from Wallace, and reminiscences about the war. Willow excused herself to prepare dinner, her mind whirling with this unexpected development. Silas Morgan was dead. She was no longer being hunted. She could leave Owen's ranch, return to Helena, try to rebuild her life. The thought should have brought only relief, but instead she felt a pang of sadness at the idea of leaving the sanctuary she'd found here. During dinner, Sheriff Wilson regaled them with stories about the colorful characters in Wallace, making both Owen and Willow laugh. It was the most relaxed she'd seen Owen, and Willow found herself storing away the image of his unguarded smile. "You know," Wilson said as he accepted a second piece of apple pie, "there's a position open at the Wallace schoolhouse. Previous teacher got herself married to a railroad man and moved to California. Town council's desperate to find a replacement before the new term starts next month." "I didn't know you had a proper school in Wallace," Owen commented. "Thought it was still lessons in the back of the church. Built a schoolhouse last year. Town's growing fast with the new silver mines opening up." Wilson turned to Willow. "You seem like an educated woman, Mrs. Keene." "Ever considered teaching?" The question caught Willow off guard. I did some tutoring in Helena, but I've never taught in a formal setting. Way I hear it, the council's not in a position to be picky. 15 children need learning and no one to teach them." Owen was watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. "It's something to consider," he said neutrally. Mrs. Keene will need employment once she's fully recovered. The reminder of her inevitable departure hung in the air between them. After Sheriff Wilson left, promising to return with news from Helena in a few weeks, Owen and Willow washed the dishes in companionable silence. "Would you really consider it?" Owen finally asked. "Teaching in Wallace," Willow dried a plate slowly, considering the question. "I hadn't thought about what I'd do next. I assumed I'd return to Helena, try to settle Thomas's affairs." She placed the plate on the shelf. "But perhaps a fresh start would be better." "Wallace is a decent town," Owen offered. "Growing, as Robert said, you might find it suits you." "And it's not too far from here," Willow said before she could stop herself. Owen's hands stilled in the wash basin. "No," he agreed quietly, "it's not far at all." The air between them grew thick with unspoken words. Willow's heart pounded as Owen turned to face her, water dripping from his hands onto the wooden floor. "Willow," he began, his voice rough with emotion. A loud crash from outside shattered the moment. Owen was instantly alert, grabbing his rifle from beside the door before stepping onto the porch. Willow followed, clutching her shawl against the evening chill. In the yard, Owen's prize stallion Thunder had somehow escaped his stall and was rearing dramatically in the moonlight, having knocked over several empty barrels. "Damn fool horse," Owen muttered, though there was affection in his tone. "Wait here." Willow watched as Owen approached the agitated animal, speaking in low, soothing tones until the stallion calmed enough to allow Owen to take hold of his halter. The sight of this strong, taciturn man gentling the powerful horse stirred something deep within her. By the time Owen returned from securing Thunder in his stall, the moment between them had passed, buried beneath practical concerns and the routine of preparing for bed. Yet as Willow lay awake that night, she found herself imagining a life in Wallace, teaching children by day and perhaps returning to this ranch on weekends. It was a dangerous fantasy, one that assumed Owen would want her to return, that he felt even a fraction of what she was beginning to feel for him. Morning brought rain and a noticeable drop in temperature. Owen built up the fire before heading out to check on the livestock, leaving Willow to contemplate her future. She took stock of her situation. Her wound was healing well. Sheriff Wilson had confirmed that her pursuer was dead, and there was potential employment in Wallace. It was more hope than she'd had in months. Yet the thought of leaving the ranch, of no longer seeing Owen every day, created a hollow feeling in her chest that she couldn't ignore. When Owen returned mid-morning, soaked and shivering, Willow insisted he change into dry clothes while she prepared hot coffee. He emerged from his bedroom in a clean flannel shirt, his hair still damp, to find her at the stove. "You don't need to fuss over me," he protested as she pressed a steaming mug into his hands. "Consider it repayment for all your nursing," Willow replied. "How are the animals managing? Miguel's bringing the closer herds into the sheltered pastures. This storm might last a few days." The prospect of being trapped indoors with Owen sent an inappropriate thrill through Willow. She busied herself with the coffee pot to hide her flushed cheeks. "Owen," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what Sheriff Wilson said about the teaching position." He looked up, his expression carefully controlled. "Oh, I think I'd like to apply for it, if you wouldn't mind taking me into Wallace when the weather clears." Owen nodded slowly. "Of course, it's a good opportunity for you." "Yes," Willow agreed, though his neutral response dampened her spirits somewhat. What had she expected? That he would declare he couldn't bear for her to leave his ranch. That was the stuff of the novels she'd discovered on his bookshelf, not real life. And she continued, forcing brightness into her voice as the sheriff said, "It's not far from here. I could visit, if that would be welcome." Owen's eyes met hers, something warm kindling in their blue depths. "It would be very welcome, Willow." The sound of her name on his lips still sent shivers through her. She smiled, hope rekindling. "Then it's settled. Once this storm passes, we'll go to Wallace." The rain continued all day, keeping them indoors. Owen worked at his desk, managing the ranch accounts while Willow read by the fire. The domesticity of it all was both comforting and bittersweet, knowing it would soon end. In the late afternoon, as light began to fade from the cloudy sky, Owen closed his ledger with a sigh. "Would you like to see something?" he asked unexpectedly. Curious, Willow followed him to a door she'd noticed but never opened. It led to a small room that must have once been a pantry but had been converted into a workshop. Inside, the walls were lined with intricate wooden carvings, horses mostly, but also birds, deer, and a few human figures. "Owen," Willow breathed, taking in the beautiful craftsmanship. "These are extraordinary," he shrugged, embarrassed by her praise. "Keeps my hands busy in the winter months." Willow moved closer to examine a particularly lifelike carving of a mare and foal. "You have a real gift." "Have you ever sold any?" "Never thought to," Owen admitted. "Just something I do for myself." "The children would love these," Willow mused. "Especially the little ones just starting school." A slow smile spread across Owen's face. "You should take some for your classroom." "If you get the position, that is." "When I get the position," Willow corrected him, feeling bold. "And I would be honored to display your work." Their eyes met in the dim light of the workshop, and Willow felt the air between them grow thick with unspoken feelings. Owen took a step toward her, and she found herself holding her breath. The sound of the front door banging open startled them both. "Owen, you in here?" Miguel's voice called out. Owen stepped back, the moment broken. "In the workshop," he called in response. Miguel appeared in the doorway, dripping wet and agitated. "The creek's rising fast. Johnson's place downstream is already flooded. We need to move the rest of the herd to higher ground before the north pasture gets cut off." Owen was immediately alert. "How much time do we have?" "Hours, maybe less. Rain's coming down harder up in the mountains." "I'll saddle Thunder," Owen said, already moving toward the door. He paused, glancing back at Willow. "Stay inside. The house is on high ground. You'll be safe here." "Be careful," Willow urged, suddenly afraid for him. Owen nodded once before disappearing into the storm with Miguel. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Willow's life. She paced the house, watching through windows as the rain pounded relentlessly on the roof, and the creek visible from the north side of the house swelled ominously. Twice, she saw riders in oilskin slickers moving groups of cattle through the downpour toward the eastern ridge. Night fell. The darkness absolute except when lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, terrifying flashes. Willow kept the lamps lit and the fire stoked, praying it would guide Owen home safely. It was well past midnight when she heard the sound of horses in the yard. She rushed to the door to find Owen helping an older man down from a horse. Both were drenched and exhausted. "Elijah Johnson's place washed out," Owen explained as they staggered inside. "Got him and his dog out just before the house went." Willow immediately set about making coffee and heating stew while Owen helped Mr. Johnson out of his wet clothes and into some dry ones. The older man was shaking, more from shock than cold. "Lost everything," he kept mumbling. 30 years in that house and it's gone just like that." "You're alive," Owen reminded him gently. "That's what matters." Once Mr. Johnson was settled by the fire with food and coffee, Owen pulled Willow aside. "I need to go back out. 2 of the hands are still moving stock and the bridge to town might not hold much longer." "You've done enough," Willow protested, noting the exhaustion etched on his face. "You're dead on your feet." "I can't leave them out there," Owen insisted. "Miguel's got a wife in town if that bridge goes." Willow understood then this was who Owen Lawson was at his core. A man who would risk himself to help others, who would brave a raging storm to ensure everyone else was safe. It was the same instinct that had led him to take in a bleeding stranger. "Then go," she said softly, touching his arm, "but come back to me." Something flickered in Owen's eyes at her words. He covered her hand with his own, calloused palm warm against her skin. "I will," he promised. After Owen left, Willow tended to Mr. Johnson, who eventually dozed off in the chair by the fire. She kept vigil by the window, watching the rain and praying for Owen's safe return. Dawn broke with the storm still raging. Willow, who had dozed fitfully in a chair by the window, woke with a start to the sound of voices in the yard. She rushed outside, heedless of the rain, to find Owen helping Miguel dismount. The ranch hand's leg was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, his face pale with pain. "What happened?" Willow asked as she hurried to help them. "Horse slipped on the ridge," Owen explained, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Miguel's leg got caught when they went down. Together, they got Miguel into the house and settled on the sofa." Willow examined his leg while Owen checked on Mr. Johnson, who was still sleeping. "It's broken," she confirmed, gently probing the swollen limb. "We need to set it before the swelling gets worse." Owen nodded grimly. "I've done it before during the war." "So have I," Willow said. "My father taught me basic medical care before he left for the war. Said a woman alone should know how to tend injuries." Owen gave her an appraising look, newfound respect in his eyes. "Let's do it together, then." They worked side by side, gathering supplies and preparing Miguel for the painful procedure. The ranch hand gripped a leather belt between his teeth as Owen and Willow carefully aligned the broken bone and splinted it securely. Miguel passed out from the pain halfway through, which was a mercy. When they'd finished, Willow washed blood from her hands while Owen covered Miguel with a blanket. "You handled that well," Owen commented, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "So did you," Willow replied. She hesitated, then added, "We make a good team." Something shifted in Owen's eyes, a realization, perhaps, or a decision made. He took a step toward her, but before he could speak, a tremendous crash shook the house. "The bridge," Owen muttered, rushing to the window. "It's gone." Willow joined him, watching as the wooden structure that connected Owen's ranch to the road to Wallace disappeared beneath the churning, debris-filled water. "We're cut off," she realized. "How long before it can be rebuilt?" "Weeks, maybe more. Depends on the damage downstream." Owen ran a hand through his hair. "You won't be making it to Wallace anytime soon." Willow should have been disappointed by this news, but instead she felt a strange relief. "I suppose my teaching career will have to wait." Owen turned to her, his expression serious. "I'm sorry, Willow. I know you were looking forward to a fresh start." "Don't be sorry," she said softly. "Perhaps this is where I'm meant to be right now." The look that passed between them held more meaning than any words could express. But with two injured men requiring their attention, whatever was growing between them would have to wait a little longer. The days following the flood established a new rhythm to life on the ranch. With the bridge out and the roads impassable, Owen's property became an island of sorts. Fortunately, the ranch was largely self-sufficient, with ample food stores for the humans and high pastures that had remained dry for the livestock. Elijah Johnson recovered his spirits somewhat, though he spoke often of rebuilding once the waters receded. Miguel's broken leg was healing well, but he was frustrated by his inability to work. His wife in Wallace would be worried, but there was no way to get a message to town until the roads cleared. Willow took over the cooking and much of the household management, freeing Owen to handle the essential ranch work. In the evenings, the four of them would gather in the main room, sharing stories and occasionally a bottle of Owen's carefully rationed whiskey. It was during one of these evenings, a week after the flood, that Mr. Johnson fixed Willow with a knowing look over his glass. "You two make quite the pair," he observed, gesturing between her and Owen. "Remind me of me and my Hazel, God rest her soul, when we were young." Willow felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Johnson, I'm merely a guest here until I can travel to Wallace." The older man hummed skeptically. "And I'm the King of England." Miguel chuckled from his place on the sofa, his splinted leg propped on a cushion. "The old man sees what we all see, Senora." Owen, who had been stoking the fire, straightened and cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's enough of that. Mrs. Keene deserves your respect." "Respect has nothing to do with it," Johnson countered good-naturedly. "Just calling it as I see it." "Life's too short not to speak plain, boy. Learned that when my Hazel passed 5 years ago." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Willow busied herself with mending one of Owen's shirts, though she could feel his gaze upon her. Later, after their guests had retired, Johnson to the spare room and Miguel to the sofa, Owen joined Willow on the porch. The rain had finally stopped, and stars glittered in the clear night sky. "I apologize for Johnson's comments," Owen said quietly. "He's from a generation that speaks its mind without filter," Willow smiled, gazing out at the silvery landscape illuminated by the moon. "There's no need to apologize. He meant no harm." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the night air cool but not unpleasant. "Is he wrong?" Owen finally asked, his voice so low she almost didn't catch the words. Willow's heart quickened. She turned to face him, finding his blue eyes intent upon her face. "About what? About us, making a pair." The directness of his question took her breath away. In that moment, Willow knew she had a choice: retreat into propriety and caution, or embrace the feelings that had been growing since the night she stumbled into his barn. "No," she answered honestly. "He isn't wrong, at least not about my feelings." Owen moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "And what are your feelings, Willow?" "I care for you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances, but I can't seem to help it." His hand came up to cup her cheek, calloused palm gentle against her skin. "I've been fighting my feelings since the night you arrived," he confessed. "Telling myself it was wrong to think of you that way when you were vulnerable, when you were healing, when you were planning to leave. And now?" Willow asked, leaning slightly into his touch. "Now I'm tired of fighting," Owen murmured, before lowering his head to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when Willow's arms came up around his neck, Owen deepened the kiss, drawing her closer until she was enveloped in his warmth and strength. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Willow rested her forehead against Owen's chest, listening to the rapid beating of his heart. "I should feel guilty," she whispered. "Thomas has only been gone 8 months." Owen's arms tightened around her. "Do you feel guilty?" Willow considered the question honestly. "No," she realized. "Thomas and I were fond of each other, but ours was a marriage of convenience more than passion. He was kind, but always chasing the next opportunity, always absent. We lived separate lives, even under the same roof." Owen stroked her hair, the gesture infinitely tender. "I don't want to rush you, Willow. When the road's clear, you should still go to Wallace, see about that teaching position. Build the life you want." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "But I hope that life might include visits to this ranch, regular ones." Willow smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'd like that very much, Owen Lawson." They sealed this new understanding with another kiss, this one filled with promise and possibility, before reluctantly parting to seek their separate beds. As Willow drifted off to sleep in Owen's bedroom, he still insisted on taking the chair or the barn. She felt more hopeful about the future than she had in years. The floodwaters receded gradually over the next 2 weeks, revealing mud-covered fields and debris-strewn roads. Word reached them via a passing rider that Wallace had suffered minimal damage, though several outlying farms had been destroyed. The bridge would be rebuilt as soon as lumber could be brought in from the sawmill in Butte. During this time, Willow and Owen's relationship deepened, though they maintained propriety with Johnson and Miguel in the house. They stole moments alone, a touch of hands while passing the coffee pot, a private conversation on the porch at sunset, a quick kiss in the barn when Owen was showing Willow a new foal. One afternoon, while the men were surveying the damage to the lower pastures, Willow decided to bake bread and apple pies. As she worked in the kitchen, she found herself humming, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The sound of a wagon approaching interrupted her baking. Curious, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. A buggy was coming up the drive, driven by a man she didn't recognize, with Sheriff Wilson riding alongside on horseback. Willow went to the porch to greet them, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "Mrs. "Keene," Sheriff Wilson called as he dismounted. "Good to see you well. This here's Mr. Everett from the Helena Bank and Trust." The banker, a thin man with spectacles, nodded politely. "Mrs. Keene, we've been attempting to locate you for some weeks now." Apprehension flickered through Willow. "Is there a problem?" "Not at all," Mr. Everett assured her. "Quite the contrary, may we speak inside?" Willow led them into the kitchen, offering coffee which both men accepted gratefully. Sheriff Wilson explained that they'd ridden the long way around, avoiding the washed-out bridge, adding nearly 10 miles to their journey. "Now then," Mr. Everett said once they were seated, "I'm here regarding the estate of Silas Morgan." Willow tensed at the name. "I don't understand." "What does his estate have to do with me?" The banker withdrew several documents from his satchel. "Upon Mr. Morgan's death, his papers were reviewed by the bank. Among them was a debt ledger containing your late husband's name." "Yes," Willow nodded. "Thomas owed Mr. Morgan a substantial sum." "Indeed," Mr. Everett agreed. "However, upon further examination, we discovered irregularities in Mr. Morgan's accounting." He adjusted his spectacles. "It appears Mr. Morgan was systematically defrauding several clients, including your husband. He was charging interest rates far above legal limits and miscalculating payments." Willow's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the documents he offered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, Mrs. Keene, that according to our recalculations, your husband's debt was fully paid 6 months before his death. In fact," Mr. Everett continued, "Mr. Morgan owed your estate a refund of approximately $300, which I have brought with me today." Willow stared at the banker in shock. $300, and no remaining debt?" "None whatsoever. Your husband's store and home are legally yours, free and clear." Mr. Everett produced another document. "This releases any claim the bank had on those properties. You're free to return to Helena and resume your life there, or to sell the properties if you prefer." Tears welled in Willow's eyes as the full import of his words sank in. She was not destitute, she had options. She was free. Sheriff Wilson cleared his throat. "There's more, Mrs. Keene. The Helena authorities would like to speak with you about Morgan's attack on you. With your testimony, they can officially close the case. The gambling man who killed Morgan is likely to be released self-defense, given Morgan's reputation." Willow nodded, still processing the banker's news. "Of course. I'll provide whatever statement is needed." After finishing their coffee, the men prepared to leave. Mr. Everett handed Willow an envelope containing the refund and copies of all the documents she'd need to claim her property. Sheriff Wilson promised to return in a few days to escort her to Wallace when she was ready. As she watched them ride away, Willow clutched the envelope to her chest, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. She had choices now, real choices about her future. When Owen returned at sunset with Johnson and Miguel, he found Willow sitting on the porch steps, lost in thought. One look at her face told him something significant had happened. "Willow," he asked, concern evident in his voice as he quickly dismounted. "What is it?" She looked up at him, her expression a complex mix of emotions. "The bank came," she said, "about Thomas's debts." Owen's jaw tightened as he sat beside her. "What did they say?" Willow explained everything: Morgan's fraud, the cleared debt, the refund, her free and clear ownership of the store and house in Helena. Owen listened without interruption, though she could see the thoughts racing behind his eyes. "That's wonderful news," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "You can go back to Helena, reclaim your life there." Willow studied his face, noting the subtle tightening around his mouth, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I could." Owen nodded once, rising to his feet. "I should see to the horses." "Owen," Willow called, stopping him. "Aren't you going to ask what I plan to do?" He turned back, vulnerability flickering briefly across his features before being masked. "That's your decision, Willow. You're free to choose your path now." "Yes, I am," she agreed, rising to stand before him. "And I'd like your input on that decision since it concerns you as well." Hope kindled in his eyes. "Me?" Willow took his hands in hers. I could return to Helena, yes. But there's nothing for me there except memories and a business I never wanted. She took a deep breath. Or I could still go to Wallace, apply for the teaching position, start fresh. And which are you leaning toward? Owen asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. Neither, actually, Willow admitted, a small smile playing at her lips. I was thinking I might stay right here if a certain rancher wouldn't mind the company. Joy bloomed across Owen's face, transforming his rugged features. Are you certain? This life isn't easy, Willow. It's remote, the winters are harsh, I'm certain about you, she interrupted. The rest we can figure out together, she hesitated. Unless I'm presuming too much. In answer, Owen pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. Willow clung to him, returning his kiss with equal fervor, her heart soaring with happiness. A throat being cleared reminded them they weren't alone. They broke apart to find Mr. Johnson grinning broadly while Miguel looked on with amusement. About damn time, Johnson declared. Now, are we having dinner, or are you two just going to make eyes at each other all evening? Laughing, Owen set Willow back on her feet but kept an arm around her waist. Dinner, he confirmed. And perhaps a celebration. That night, after their guests had retired, Owen and Willow sat together on the porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder as they gazed at the stars. I'll need to go to Helena eventually, Willow mused. To sell the store and house, pack up my belongings. I'll go with you, Owen offered. When you're ready. Willow smiled, nestling closer. And then we'll come home. Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. Home, he agreed, the word rich with meaning. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the swing and the distant call of a coyote. Willow, Owen began hesitantly. I know it's soon. Too soon, perhaps, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. When enough time has passed, when you're ready. He took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say is, yes, Willow interrupted, turning to face him. Owen blinked. Yes, I haven't asked a question yet. But you were going to, she replied, eyes twinkling, and my answer is yes. When enough time has passed, when it's proper, I will marry you, Owen Lawson. Joy and love illuminated his face as he cupped her cheeks in his hands. I love you, Willow Keene, have since you stumbled into my barn that stormy night. And I love you, she whispered back. Thank you for giving me shelter when I needed it most. This house owes you shelter, Owen murmured against her lips, and I owe you my heart. Under the vast Montana sky, their lips met in a kiss that sealed their future together, a future born from a moment of desperate need that had blossomed into love as enduring as the mountains surrounding their home. 3 months later, Willow stood in the newly expanded garden behind Owen's now their home, harvesting late summer vegetables for dinner. The October sun warmed her back as she filled her basket with tomatoes, carrots, and beans. So much had changed since that rainy June day when Sheriff Wilson and Mr. Everett had brought news that altered the course of her life. She and Owen had traveled to Helena in July, where Willow had sold the store and house, settled her affairs, and packed her belongings. The journey had been bittersweet, closing the chapter on her life with Thomas while opening a new one with Owen. Upon their return to the ranch, Owen had formally proposed with his mother's ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. They were to be married in 2 weeks, with Sheriff Wilson officiating and the entire town of Wallace in attendance. The ranch itself was thriving. Using part of her funds from the Helena properties, Willow had helped Owen expand his horse breeding program. Their first sale of trained stock had brought in more money than Owen had made in the previous 2 years combined. Miguel had recovered fully and returned to work, bringing his wife Maria and their 2 children to live in the expanded cabin near the corral. Maria had become Willow's dear friend and valued help with the expanded household. Even Mr. Johnson had found his place in their growing family. Too old to rebuild his homestead alone, he had accepted Owen's offer to stay on as an advisor and extra hand. His knowledge of weather patterns and livestock had proven invaluable, and his stories kept them entertained during evening meals. Willow was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear Owen approach until his arms slipped around her waist from behind. Daydreaming. He murmured against her ear, making her smile. Remembering, she corrected, leaning back against his solid chest. Thinking about how much has changed since I stumbled onto your land. Owen turned her in his arms, his blue eyes warm with love. For the better, I hope. Infinitely, Willow assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of an approaching wagon. They turned to see Sheriff Wilson driving up the lane, waving cheerfully. "News from Wallace," he called as he pulled up. School boards finally found a teacher fellow from back east with proper credentials. "That's wonderful," Willow replied sincerely. She had briefly considered the teaching position herself, but had decided her place was on the ranch with Owen. And Wilson continued with a grin, "Mail's running again. Got a letter for Mrs. Soon-to-be Lawson." He handed Willow an envelope bearing the seal of the Helena Bank and Trust. Curious, she opened it while Owen and the sheriff discussed the upcoming wedding. As she read the contents, Willow gasped loud enough to interrupt the men's conversation. "What is it?" Owen asked, concern furrowing his brow. "It's from Mr. Everett," Willow explained, her voice trembling with excitement. "They've completed the final audit of Silas Morgan's accounts. It seems he had several investments that have been liquidated and the proceeds distributed to those he defrauded." She looked up at Owen, eyes shining. "There's a bank draft enclosed for $500 additional restitution for Thomas's losses." Owen whistled low. "That's a significant sum." "We could expand the breeding program further," Willow suggested, "or perhaps build that new barn you've been talking about." Owen smiled, pulling her close. "Or set it aside for our future, for the family we'll have someday." The thought of children, little ones with Owen's blue eyes and steady nature filled Willow's heart with joy. "Our family," she agreed softly. Sheriff Wilson cleared his throat. "Speaking of family, Mrs. Johnson asked me to deliver a message. Says she's finished the wedding quilt and wants to know if you'll be coming by to see it before the ceremony." Willow smiled at the mention of Elijah Johnson's daughter, who had traveled from Colorado upon learning of her father's circumstances. Rebecca Johnson had quickly become part of their extended ranch family, her cheerful presence and excellent cooking a welcome addition to their gatherings. "Tell her I'll come tomorrow," Willow promised, "and thank her again for all her help with the wedding preparations." After Sheriff Wilson departed, promising to return for dinner the following Sunday with Rebecca as his guest, a budding courtship that delighted everyone, Owen and Willow returned to the garden to finish harvesting. "I never imagined this life," Willow confessed as they worked side by side. "When I fled Helena, I thought my future held only fear and struggle. Now look at us." Owen paused, setting down his basket to take her hands in his. "The night you stumbled into my barn, bleeding and desperate, I told you this house owed you shelter." His voice deepened with emotion. "What I didn't know was that you would bring life back to it and to me." Willow squeezed his hands, remembering the taciturn, solitary man who had saved her life that stormy night. "We saved each other, I think." Owen nodded, then grinned suddenly. "Though I still maintain Thunder deserves some credit. If he hadn't gotten spooked during that storm, I wouldn't have been in the barn when you arrived." Willow laughed, the sound carrying across the fields they now tended together. "Then we'll be sure to give him an extra apple at feeding time." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land that had become her home, Willow gazed up at the man who would soon be her husband. From the most desperate moment of her life had come its greatest blessing. She had stumbled, bleeding and afraid, into the barn of a lonely cowboy, and found not just shelter, but love, family, and a future brighter than she could have imagined. 2 weeks later, Willow stood in what had once been Owen's bedroom, now their bedroom, as Rebecca Johnson helped her with the final touches of her wedding dress. The simple gown of ivory silk had been ordered from a dressmaker in Butte, and though modest by city standards, It was the finest thing Willow had ever owned. "You look beautiful," Rebecca declared, adjusting the small cluster of wildflowers in Willow's upswept hair. "Owen's going to lose his breath when he sees you." Willow smiled at her reflection in the mirror. Happiness had brought a glow to her cheeks and a sparkle to her eyes that no cosmetic could replicate. "I can hardly believe this day is finally here." A knock at the door preceded Maria's entrance, her eyes widening at the sight of Willow in her wedding finery. "Ay, que hermosa," she exclaimed. "The guests are all here and Sheriff Wilson says whenever you're ready." "And Owen?" Willow couldn't help asking. Maria grinned. "Nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, but Miguel is keeping him calm. He is very handsome in his new suit." The thought of steady, confident Owen being nervous brought a tender smile to Willow's face. "Tell them I'll be ready in 5 minutes." After Maria left, Rebecca handed Willow a small package. "A wedding gift from Papa and me. He wanted you to have it before the ceremony." Curious, Willow unwrapped the brown paper to find a small wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of roses. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate gold locket. "It was my mother's," Rebecca explained. "Papa thought you should have something borrowed and something old for luck." Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as she embraced the other woman. "Thank you. This means so much to me." Rebecca fastened the locket around Willow's neck, then stepped back with a satisfied nod. "Perfect. Now, let's not keep that man of yours waiting any longer." The ceremony took place in the garden, where late-blooming wildflowers and early autumn leaves created a natural backdrop of gold and purple. Willow's breath caught as she walked toward Owen, who stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his blue eyes never leaving her face. Sheriff Wilson officiated with surprising eloquence, speaking of commitment, partnership, and the kind of love that builds a life worth living. When it came time for their vows, Owen's strong voice carried across the gathering without wavering, promising to love, honor, and cherish Willow for all his days. When Willow's turn came, she spoke from her heart, her voice clear and sure. "Owen Lawson, you offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to turn. You tended my wounds, protected me from harm, and showed me what true strength looks like. I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with every breath I take for as long as I live." There wasn't a dry eye among their guests as Owen slipped his mother's ring onto Willow's finger, followed by a simple gold band that had been his father's. When Sheriff Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Owen gathered Willow into his arms for a kiss that prompted cheers and good-natured whistles from the assembled friends and neighbors. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Tables laden with food and drink were set up in the yard, and Miguel's brother-in-law provided music with his fiddle and guitar. Owen and Willow danced beneath lanterns strung from tree to tree, their faces alight with joy as they moved in perfect harmony. "Mrs. Lawson," Owen murmured against Willow's ear as they swayed to a slow melody. "How does it sound?" "Like home," Willow replied, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Like exactly where I'm meant to be." Later, after the last guest had departed and the newlyweds were finally alone, Owen carried Willow across the threshold of their home. In the privacy of their bedroom, illuminated only by moonlight streaming through the curtains, he kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you, Willow Lawson," he whispered against her lips, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart overflowing with happiness. "My shelter, my home, my heart." As Owen gently laid her on their bed, Willow thought of the desperate woman who had stumbled, bleeding, into his barn months before. How far she had come from that dark night, from fear to safety, from loneliness to love, from uncertainty to the surest thing she'd ever known. That she belonged with this man in this place for all the days of her life. 5 years later, Willow sat on the porch swing, watching as Owen demonstrated to their 3-year-old son James how to gently brush a pony's mane. The little boy, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, listened with solemn attention before carefully mimicking Owen's movements. Beside her, nestled in a Moses basket, their 2-month-old daughter Elizabeth slept peacefully, one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. Willow gently rocked the basket with her foot, marveling at how complete her life had become. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. Owen's breeding program was now renowned throughout Montana territory, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase his horses. The original house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family and frequent guests, and a new, larger barn stood where the old one had been. Mr. Johnson had passed peacefully in his sleep the previous winter, but his daughter Rebecca had remained in Wallace, now happily married to Sheriff Wilson. They visited regularly, as did Miguel and Maria's growing family, who still lived in the improved cabin near the corral. Willow's gaze drifted to the spot where she and Owen had exchanged their vows 5 years earlier. The garden had expanded as well, now providing much of their food and even some flowers and vegetables to sell in Wallace during market days. She was so lost in contentment that she didn't notice Owen approaching until he settled beside her on the swing, James riding proudly on his shoulders. "Mama, I brushed Thunder's baby all by myself," the little boy announced, blue eyes bright with accomplishment. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Willow replied, reaching up to ruffle his hair. "You'll be a fine horseman like your father." Owen lifted James down, and the boy immediately went to peer at his sleeping sister. "She's still sleeping," he observed with mild disappointment. "When will she be big enough to play?" "Soon enough," Owen assured him, slipping an arm around Willow's shoulders. "Why don't you go help Maria gather eggs for dinner? Tell her mama says it's fine." James needed no further encouragement, racing off toward the henhouse with the boundless energy of childhood. "He's growing so fast," Willow mused, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. Owen nodded, reaching over to gently touch their daughter's downy hair. "Both of them are precious beyond words." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. The late September air was crisp, but not yet cold, perfect for the harvest season that was keeping everyone busy. "I had a letter from the bank today," Owen mentioned casually. "The Petersons' place is going up for auction next month, 300 acres adjoining our north pasture. Are you thinking of bidding?" Willow asked, already knowing the answer. They had discussed expanding when the opportunity arose. "If you think it's wise," Owen replied, "it would mean dipping into our savings." Willow smiled, still touched after 5 years of marriage by the way Owen made every major decision a partnership. "I think it's an excellent investment in our future. That land has good water access and would nearly double our grazing capacity." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then we'll plan to attend the auction." Elizabeth stirred in her basket, making small sounds that Willow recognized as the prelude to hungry cries. She lifted the infant into her arms, cradling her close as the baby nuzzled against her. "I'll give you some privacy," Owen offered, starting to rise. Willow caught his hand. "Stay. I love watching you with her." Owen settled back beside her as Willow adjusted her shawl and guided the baby to her breast. His expression as he watched their daughter nurse was one of such tender wonder that Willow felt her heart expand with love for this man who had become her world. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "When I stumbled into your barn?" Owen's eyes met hers, warm with memory. "Often. It was the night my life truly began, though I didn't know it then." "You saved me," Willow reminded him. "And you saved me right back," Owen countered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I was existing, not living. You brought light back into my world, Willow." They shared a gentle kiss over their nursing daughter's head, a moment of perfect communion between two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Owen and Willow stood together on the porch, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they gazed at the star-filled Montana sky. "I have something for you," Owen said, reaching into his pocket. He pressed a small object into Willow's palm, a beautifully carved wooden heart, small enough to fit in her locket but detailed enough to show the skill of its maker. "It's beautiful," Willow murmured, turning it over in her hand. Upon closer inspection, she saw that tiny letters were etched into the back, W and O forever. "5 years ago today, you honored me by becoming my wife," Owen said, his voice husky with emotion. "Every day since has been a gift beyond measure." Willow turned in his arms, rising on tiptoes to kiss him with all the love in her heart. "And every day to come will be the same," she promised. "Our life, our love, our family, it all began that stormy night when I had nowhere else to turn. And I said stay. This house owes you shelter," Owen recalled, drawing her closer. "Little did we know," Willow whispered against his lips, "that in sheltering me you were building us a home." As they stood entwined beneath the vast Montana sky, the ranch sleeping peacefully around them, Willow Lawson knew with absolute certainty that she had found what every human heart seeks. Not just shelter from life's storms, but a love strong enough to weather them together, building something beautiful and enduring from what began as a moment of desperate need. And in the years to come, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, Owen and Willow would often share the story of how their love began with a wounded woman, a compassionate cowboy, and the simple, profound words that changed both their lives forever. "Stay. This house owes you shelter." For in opening his door to a stranger in need, Owen Lawson had unwittingly opened his heart as well. And in accepting his shelter, Willow had found not just safety, but the home and love she had never known she was seeking. Their story, begun in blood and fear, had blossomed into a life filled with joy, purpose, and the deepest kind of love, the kind that doesn't just shelter, but nurtures, strengthens, and endures through all of life's seasons. And it had all begun with a storm, a barn, and two souls finding in each other exactly what they needed most.